there are power dynamics here within this idea of socialism that seem so likely to corrupt the individual in charge that it's an untenable idea. I like to use the example of like the kid game King of the Hill. Well, imagine you're playing that on a big stack of gravel. Okay, that's the market. That's your market process. Everyone's fighting to get to the top. The moment you get to the top, not only is everyone else trying to knock you down, your footing's unstable too.
You can't control a free market because that's by definition, It's a free market, right? Government likes control. They like controlling things. So if you like controlling things, what is the best form of economic theory that you would want to have? It'd be socialism. Everyone, thank you so much for coming back to the show. I'm excited for this podcast for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is the first time in our brand new studio, which I know I've talked to you guys that it's coming soon, but we finally did it, so that's exciting. Thank you all for the support over the year. I have my buddy Wes here. Wes, our relationship's fun. We were just talking about it off camera. We met on Twitter because we were both diehard Pistons fans. Wes happens to be a producer of a very successful podcast called The Pistons Pulse.
Yeah, the blog's not there yet.
Blog's not where you want to go, yeah. But very successful from a sports podcast perspective, and he produces that. He also has his own podcast called The Pin Down that he runs with Blake Silverman. And so he's done a lot of content creation, but his real passion is economics. He has his master's degree from George Mason. Correct me if I get any of this wrong. And we met on Twitter because of the Pistons, and then over time we created a really good relationship. And the way we actually started talking was because I tweeted out something that didn't make sense to me. And then he messaged me on Twitter being like, I might actually have an economic answer for you. And then now you're on the show. So welcome, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So for everyone listening, we have not done anything like this before. This is a new kind of mode for us to go to. In the past, it's been all business, but I'd love today to kind of talk about economics of kind of like a bunch of questions I have. I think economics can be scary for a lot of people. I think, or they just don't care, or they don't know how it works. And economics is very important because it kind of runs the country in a way, like at least the theories behind it. And so we're going to talk about a lot of fun things today, a lot of potential controversial things today. And controversial, not because we're trying to be, just because when it comes to these belief structures, there are people that will die on both hills. And so I wanted to talk to someone that has a lot more knowledge than I do about these issues, and that happened to be Wes. And Wes drove 3 hours, 2 hours and 45.
I mean, we could round that up.
To be here. And we're glad you're here, man. So I guess the first thing that brought us together was this question. We can just kind of dive in here. So
Absolutely.
If anyone follows my Twitter, I wouldn't recommend it unless you want to get a lot of political. Pistons and politics are like the two things I tweet.
The two Ps.
So I was looking at the homelessness of California, okay? And I was just saying, why do people in California vote for Gavin Newsom? Because to me, from an outside looking in, I'm like, I wouldn't want to live there right now. Things are crazy expensive. The homelessness is out of control. And so I just put out the question, why do people vote for Gavin Newsom? And then you responded and you were just like, I have an answer. So talk to me about voter economics. Like why do people vote the way they vote? And then you have a theory on this. So talk to me about this.
Well, it's not my theory. So I want to make sure that one's clear. This is all coming from what's known as the public choice school of economics. So that is more of the political bent. A lot of economics will get into like institutional type analysis. Public choice is very much why do voters and why do political systems output the things that they do. So in this specific instance, the first thing that you got to be aware of when you're analyzing it is to ask the question, does that one vote really matter? Statistically, it doesn't, right? So in order for a vote to matter, you'd need an election so close that it's going to come down to one vote. And not only that, you'd need that one vote to be your vote, right? So the odds of that ever happening, even at a really small local election, incredibly small, incredibly low odds. So practically, you should vote. I'm not telling you not to vote. I think voting's a civic duty, and it's a good thing for a lot of people to do. But practically, your vote is not going to be the deciding one. So if you're not voting because you think your vote is going to decide the election, which is the assumption we're going to make here, then why would you vote? There are high costs. It takes a lot of time to get to the polls. It takes a lot of time to research all of these candidates, to have an understanding of where everyone's policy position is, your opinions on it, even just watching the news. That's part of the voting process for actual individual voters. That takes time too. So there is a fairly high cost. You need something valuable enough for most people to, exceed that cost. So that's the calculation you're trying to make. In this case, I would expect most public choice theorists would lean to saying that there's a social desirability bias. People want to be well-liked amongst their friends. So if you can be voting Democrat in California, where likely most of your friends are Democrats and are very happy with these positions, whether you hold them or not, if you say, hey, I just voted for Gavin Newsom, and you get a pat on the back, that can make it all worth it. In reality, you're just trying to be a little bit closer to the people you care about. And that's a pretty rational thing to do. I wouldn't say that it's the wrong approach, but in terms of why people might vote against, quote unquote, their self-interest, whatever someone might identify that as, there is a lot of social capital that you can gain.
So what would it take then for somebody to say, I know all of my friends, like at what point is the breaking point? Because I feel like at some level, if I'm living in California and I can't safely walk from point A to point B, I'm going to say, I'm not voting with my family. But that is what the theory is people will, to their potential own harm and detriment, do what's popular. Is that
sort of? So what I would say is that the weight, the push and pull of this is between your vote mattering to change that outcome versus the potential feedback you could get from friends, family, coworkers, right?
Yeah.
So again, if we go all the way, we go back to saying statistically my vote's not going to change the outcome. If I accept this, then you're really only doing yourself harm. If you think about it, by voting for what you truly want in the end, if you disagree with Gavin Newsom in this case, right? You're doing yourself more harm because your circle will likely find out that, hey, I voted against this. They'll be upset with you, and you lose some of that social capital. Whereas you flip it, you say, okay, well, it's not likely that I'm going to change this myself by casting my one vote against Gavin Newsom, again in this case, right? Why would I? Why does it matter? I stand more to lose personally than the state stands to lose in that general election.
Yeah, because we were talking about it at lunch, and you kind of mentioned it here. It's where it's like each person's vote actually statistically doesn't matter. Like the way you phrased it was, if that your vote is going to be the deciding vote, is going to be the probability of 0. Pretty much, like the percentage is not in your favor that your vote's going to actually
under 1.
matter. Yeah.
It's not, of course, to be clear, it's not 0, but it's well under 1%
chance.
And
And
well
so,
under
in
10.
theory, someone's like, "Well, my vote doesn't matter anyway." So if that's what people believe, that their vote doesn't matter, then they're going to do with socially whatever makes the most sense.
Effectively, right? You're venturing into this now space of something called rational irrationality, right? So there's another aspect of this to, why are so many people uninformed voters? Well, because of all of the cost associated with going to the polls to cast your vote, to stay informed, and again, the low probability that you yourself will impact the outcome. It actually makes a lot of sense not to spend the time to do it. Right? So with all of these, the tension is not between the outcome that you want or don't want versus the social power, whatever you think that you might be able to get out of voting. The tension is between whatever you might be able to get out of voting positively and the odds of not voting in that way actually impacting the outcome, which again is next to nothing.
So democracies don't matter. No, I was kidding.
Oh, don't go that far. Don't go that far.
So it's a hard balance because then if statistically everyone believes their vote doesn't matter, then no one would vote. So there is at some point our votes do matter at some level.
Yeah.
Right? No,
Well,
like my democracy childhood is just being crashed in front of my eyes right now. No, but you get the tension, right? Because that's the tension if statistically, but it still as a whole matters who places what vote, right? Because if no one voted, then that would be a completely different story.
right. So now we're just going to talk math here for a hot second. So hopefully I don't scare anybody away. But on concept, you individually are a whole lot different than the mass. The mass matters.
Yeah.
If a lot of people vote and a lot of people are going to collectively vote for one specific outcome such that that outcome wins, that's a big deal. That matters quite a bit.
Right.
You specifically participating in that vote for that outcome won't matter a lot at all. So the practical question for people engaging in politics is how do we craft this large coalition so that we can win elections when in the public choice field you would say you probably know that these people at least have some vague awareness that it's not going to matter too much if I specifically vote. So this is why, you will see a lot of political events, right? They're not just saying, hey, come listen to this guy speak, this politician. They're saying, hey, come listen to him speak. Afterwards, you might get a chance to interact. You'll get food, you'll get drinks. There are other things that they're selling to get you in the door to try and motivate you into action, right? It's kind of like, in college. Go to this event, you'll get free pizza.
Right.
It's not the event that gets you there.
Planet Fitness on Fridays.
Right, yeah.
Come work out, get free pizza.
It's
Do you
the
remember when
pizza.
they did that? Yeah. Well, so if I'm a politician, then you have two choices because this kind of makes sense now with what's happening. You either, if there's a cost to vote, time,
And there
learning, right? Then there's one of two ways that you can do. You can either make the cost more worth it by doing events, by making it seem more worth your while, or you can lower the cost.
Yes.
So right now, the left is saying in-person voting shouldn't have to be a thing. You don't have to bring an ID card. In economic theory, you could argue that what they're trying to do is just lower the cost of voting.
Practically, yeah. I would say they are.
Okay, that's intriguing. I have my own thoughts on that, but that's not for this podcast. No, I was kidding. So that's it. That's interesting.
Now, to be clear, too, with that specifically, you're not reducing the cost to zero. Yeah. There's still time that you have to take filling out the sheet. There's time that you have to take mailing it.
Yeah.
And actually, maybe in some cases, if you don't have a mailbox attached to your apartment or you don't have a post office nearby, it may actually be more difficult for you to vote by mail in terms of this cost of time, right, that you're taking to actually get that vote in. And remember, all of this cost, too, this is technically an opportunity cost, right? So it's not the fact that you're spending the time. It's the fact that this time will be spent on one thing or something else that may be more valuable to you.
In business, I mean, this is very similar to a business, which I've never thought of voting this way at all, or getting votes. If you had a website store, right, you would want to make it as easy as possible for people to click and purchase. You want to take the all of the steps and the questionnaires and all of the junk out. You want it to be that's why Amazon is the king of the buy now button, right? They already have all your information. They've made it too easy to buy, the cost to buy now as far as time and the pain of I don't know if anyone's ever gone to a website where you've gone to where you bought your stuff and then Googled it to save your and you I don't want to put in my credit card information right now. So you don't do it. Same theory. Right? In theory,
sure, yeah.
Voting, if people could in theory make voting easier, then they in a sense could get more votes. And so they're just trying to take down the cost of voting, potentially.
And I would add to this that practically probably the most consuming aspect of this cost to voting is the cost of getting your awareness and knowledge of certain issues up. So, we're dealing with a not insignificant, but a smaller portion of what I would define as the real cost of voting. The time that you would have to spend during the election cycle to be a truly informed voter, right, and make a decision based on all of that information, it's actually quite high.
Yeah, which that's
it
hard
really
to do.
is.
Well, that's hard to do anymore. Either how do you dictate truly, informed when it's hard to even believe any of the information that you're actually reading. And is it?
And that's
like,
another layer. Yeah.
That's another layer of how do you find fair, legit, true facts, not just facts based off of one party or another. That's I can't remember. There's a website and I can't remember who promotes it. Oh, Graham Stephan does. I don't know if you know who Graham Stephan is. He's a YouTuber, very successful, but they promote a website where they bring in articles on the left and the right on a topic on the
like
same
both
website.
sides.
Yeah. So you'll search whatever topic you're interested in, immigration, whatever. There'll be articles from Fox and CNN right beside each other. And so you can see like the actual like headlines and how they differ. Like just
pretty cool.
Is there actually I can't remember what it's called. Maybe I'll put it as a link, but that's interesting as far as like I never viewed voting that way. And I think it makes sense to some degree why like someone like California, like in my mind, I'm like, even if you vote another Democrat, it's not Gavin. Like that's how I think about it. But if people don't believe their vote doesn't really matter in the scoop thing, which it doesn't,
right,
per math, but also socioeconomically with their friends. I mean, do they believe it enough to lose that connection with?
Right.
That's really the question, right?
Yeah.
It's like, are they willing to give up the socio? Do you want more coffee?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
For the very, very low percentage that that vote actually does accomplish anything.
Right. Now, this will probably end up being a theme as we continue talking, but economics as a science, it's a social science, okay? So really it's a study of human interaction. It's transactions back and forth. So this theory does in large part rest on the assumption that people are aware that their vote doesn't matter. You can make an argument both ways on that. I have no good answer.
So that's the premise. The premise of this theory is that people going
that's
into
the tension,
voting.
Right, that's the tension. The tension is I know that I can't influence the outcome, so what can I do to still go and vote, right? Because there has to be something that's worth it to me to get out and go vote and be informed about it.
But in theory,
cetera,
if everyone did believe that their vote actually mattered, then things might look differently, in theory.
Correct. And you can make an
But
argument both ways to that.
You're telling me that votes don't matter.
Votes, definitively, your individual vote doesn't matter.
That doesn't help my cause, man.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Whether everybody en masse is aware of it, different question.
But the individual creates the mass, right?
In some ways.
So then in that theory, it does matter because you are part of the mass. And without your actual vote,
the mass
doesn't exist.
Though. The mass is a given. We're gonna get it's a little determinist now, right? There's some deeper philosophical layers here, but
semantics a little bit too.
By and large, people will vote.
Yeah,
there will be a lot of them.
Yes.
So, given that reality, your vote specifically,
and that's where the theory comes from. That makes sense,
or at least partially. Yeah.
That's interesting. I think that's a good segue into where I want to go next, because the beautiful thing about America as a whole is that some of us don't believe it exists anymore, but at one point we had a democracy, and
it was a republic.
It was, and people actually could vote, and it mattered. I don't know if that's the case anymore, but that's besides the point. But I grew up being taught that capitalism was good, healthy, while maybe flawed, the best we have. As I've been growing up, we've had a very big push in America for socialism. Bigger
worldwide,
push.
Yeah.
In worldwide, very. It was already worldwide at some level, but then it kind of seems like it's gone in other countries now. It's just kind of invading us. I mean, obviously Canada being one and right next to us. And as a kid, I remember being like, wow, I really hope America is never socialist, because from what I was taught, capitalism is best. And so I'm going into this argument, obviously with, I would like to think as a decent amount of education, because both a college degree and a high school degree
qualifies.
So at least I have some level of education on this, but I don't have the actual economics of it, because I think a lot of people would be like, well, socialism is bad because of this socioeconomic issue that I'm passionate about, or capitalism does this because, it's not fair to this certain time, whereas if we look at the economics and we look at the math of it, that's what I'm curious about. Gotcha. And so one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show was I wanted to be like, okay, if we just strip the emotion away from this debate, capitalism versus socialism. And we just said, you know what? We're not going to talk about the people picking them up, why America's the greatest country in the world, and like that, like why people. We're not going to talk about any of the actual case study, like proof of the good or bad. Just the pure economics of why one is better than the other. I'm interested to know your thoughts on capitalism versus socialism. And then, is there a better one? Is there a third that I don't know that would be better than, in your opinion, than and I know I'm asking very loaded questions, and you're like, I don't know where to start with all of this, but that's my question. So I guess if we want to talk about capitalism, because I think we are pretty familiar. What is capitalism? So let's define it for our listeners, just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then maybe talk about pros and cons of capitalism, or do you want to just kind of jump back and forth between both? Like, what do you think would be better?
Gosh, I was aware of this coming in, but these are two softballs, really. Fantastic start.
Good. I'm glad I set it up well.
You set it up well. Okay, we can define capitalism, and then we can kind of, I guess, go from there. So, capitalism as a market system is effectively just an unregulated market. Okay. So I assume, based on how this has started, we'll probably get into this later on. Would not argue we're living in a purely capitalistic society. I doubt that many economists would. So if you're going to go a pure capitalism, firms and consumers, no government in the way, very little, if any, regulation on top of that. It is just a pure interaction in a market setting.
Can I ask you a quick question on that?
Of course.
Have we ever experienced that in America?
No. Okay. I cannot, off the top of my head, think of any example of a purely capitalism. Now, I think we can segue this into talking about both a little bit, because practically neither's been fully implemented. So I know that there's, sometimes you'll see online socialism truly hasn't been tried. And it's like, well, I can also say capitalism hasn't truly been tried. So let's talk about the theory of why both would or wouldn't work. Okay. So with economics, it is a study of a market, right? I said earlier, it's human interaction. So on the theory, I do feel pretty well equipped to talk about either.
Okay, so then capitalism is an unregulated market where transactions can happen without any type of intervention, and allowing human interaction to just happen, and the next thing's just kind of whatever happens. Yep. Without a third party coming in and setting things and whatever.
Generally speaking.
Okay. Socialism, let's contrast that. So if that's capitalism, what is socialism?
Command and control. So you have a centralized economy. You have a person, could be a few people, doesn't have to be specifically one, but you have basically a central body of control that will be dictating how much of good X goes to firm and consumer YZ, right? And so on down. So if you want to think about it in extremely simplified terms, capitalism is extraordinarily decentralized. Socialism is extraordinarily centralized.
Okay. And so let's just pretend America was the poster child for capitalism.
Okay.
Who is the poster child that majority, not some random country out there somewhere in the world, but what would be probably the most popular?
Soviet Russia.
Okay. Would be the most contrast.
Yeah, Soviet Russia.
Okay. So let's actually talk socialism first.
Okay.
The people that are pushing for socialism in the United States, what is their pros? Why push it? What are they telling people that we are going to gain if we become more of a socialist country?
It's there is a little bit of a utopia-ness that I would argue comes through. Now, I'm maybe a little bit negative on that end of it, but basically by controlling all of these mechanisms, we'll be able to select better outcomes for everybody in the market. So everybody's going to be better off if we're socialist. You don't have to work. You can just do whatever, if you want to do something artsy, you could do this podcast full time, Things like
Don't
that.
tell me that. I might turn
I know,
socialist. No,
I know. But things like that,
Yeah,
those are
yeah.
generally
Okay.
the arguments, at least that I've heard. Historically, it goes a little all over the place. But
Okay. So socialism is one person or one group of people controlling things for the masses. Fair at some level.
controlling markets.
Markets.
So
Okay.
Marx was not an economist; he was a philosopher. Socialism is an economic theory, right? So while there are quite a bit of aspects that do lean more into sociology, the meat and potatoes of socialism is economics. So he very much crafted a market system that was controlled. Yeah, it was controlled, right? So it was a government forward market system. It is more or less what socialism is, at least economically speaking. So again, Soviets, yeah, that was communism. They implemented some socialism, some not. It wasn't perfect. It was not pure. Marx would not have been happy. Actually, Lenin wouldn't have been happy either with what Stalin did. But in terms of the tenets of how the system functioned, very similar.
Okay. And so then if and by the way, is communism and socialism, so is like socialism the economic rules of communism,
Not quite.
or are they
They're
two
different.
distinct things? Okay.
They're two distinct things. So Marx makes the argument that this is kind of a progress. You have capitalism. Capitalism devolves into something you've probably heard of now, late stage capitalism, where he argues that capitalism breeds basically monopolists. Through that, you're going to remove power and freedom from the masses, the proletariat. The workers are going to rise up, take over, and institute a socialist system, which is governed by the people that were at the bottom, but practically it's just a set controlled outcome is the goal, right? Now
Socialism.
of socialism. Now you add on top of that, communism is more of a political apparatus, more so than an economic function. So you had like Stalin probably, I guess I don't know for sure, but seemed to believe in socialism. He was part of that movement. Communism was the political style that he set up. Socialism is not political. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, well,
I
I have
know
a
this
lot
is
of
kind of
follow-up questions,
bouncing
so don't
back and
worry.
forth. So
No, you're good. So then and this is why we have 2 hours, we can talk about as
Sure.
much as we want. We're not in a time crunch. So is it then, so if socialism is an economic
It is.
theory of
It is.
utopia,
It's a system. It's an institution.
can you then have a political democracy with a socialist economy?
Have you heard of democratic socialists?
Sure, I have.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that advocate for that exact thing. I don't necessarily think it's practical. I think there are power dynamics that are probably untenable there that would ruin the idea. But yeah, there are quite a few people that would advocate for that exact sort of thing, a mix of democracy and socialism. And in fact, I was just the other day reading a book written by someone who's a socialist. A friend recommended it to me.
Okay.
Doing a favor reading it
Yeah.
through, even though I haven't enjoyed it all that much. But this author makes the specific argument that socialism is in fact more democratic than capitalism is, even with democracy involved, because socialism on some level is a product of workers. So it's a little more bottom up, though it ends in central control. That's the argument that he made. Yeah. So
this is my
absolutely.
question. The thing that's not clicking with my brain with socialism is the theory is always like the people at the bottom get have control now, and they can capitalism creates monopolies, right? And socialism can tear them down, and socialism is there to help the poor and the low man and the totem pole, right? But there's still a group of people laying down the rules for it to function, right?
Mm-hmm. Practically, yeah. What might help? Think of unions. I'm not going to say unions are socialist. They're not. They're just a labor group, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the type of effect and outcomes that they strive for. So if you look at the auto workers, right? just recently, Michigan gets rid of right to work. That means now if you're working in an auto factory, you have to be part of the union. The union, they have quite a bit of power because of that, both in direct negotiations with firms and when they're dealing with the government. And through that, though the leaders of the UAW are appointed by vote from all of the members, right? They do have complete power over what the union does.
Right.
So in a way, it's somewhat similar because you truly just have the workers. The workers have kind of put forth their talking head, and now this is going to be the individual that makes all of the decisions for the group. The group still is technically in power. It's being operated by this one individual. Hopefully that makes some sense.
100% sense. So then if I'm a social, so let's say like I'm like, okay, this in theory would be amazing for America because capitalism is bad.
Yeah.
What's the economic reason that it just can't work? Like why could, if you're like in theory, socialism would support the lower man, bring people up, allow everyone to have a more equal lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. Like, why can't that work?
So you mentioned earlier that we might get into some math. You were hoping to see the statistics.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's
I don't have math for
That's
you on
okay.
this one. This is going to be just pure theory. So hopefully,
that's
if
good
I say
enough.
something that's too far, go ahead and make me re-explain it. But I want to bring up something. It was a period of time in the early 1900s. This was the socialist calculation debate. Not a lot of people know about it. But this was something that purely went on within the field of economics.
Sorry, when was this? You just said it, but when?
Early 1900s.
1900s, okay.
Early 1900s.
The socialist debate. Or socialist.
Calculation debate. Okay. So socialism relies on what we call calculation. So there's a central person in control, and from this one spot, they need to be deciding who gets how much of what, economy-wide. Everybody is now under the purview of this individual. The argument is there a practical way to make this one person so capable that everybody's better off, that we get better outputs than what a market would decide? Because a market's very scattershot, right? It's very trial and error. There's a lot of really big successes, a lot of really big failures, and it's very, very difficult to predict what an outcome's going to be.
Right.
So if there is a way to calculate a better outcome, would be better. So this is kind of the crux of the debate. Socialism is pushing centralized calculation, and the people that were arguing against it were pushing decentralized, let it happen because we don't know, we can't calculate. The two kind of big sides of this were Oscar Lange, you had F.A. Hayek, and Ludwig von Mises. Mises and Hayek were part of the Austrian School of Economics.
Okay.
I actually don't know what school Lange was part of now that I'm thinking about it. But regardless, these are your main characters. Okay. So the two big critiques that we really need to bring up, the first is Mises. Mises brings up price. Okay. So imagine that you are a central planner. You are in charge of the railroads and you want to lay more track. Okay. All right. So you need iron. You need iron to lay more track. And this is going to be straight out of a textbook. So I hope this is easy enough for you.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm following.
I
have an IQ of 10, so I should.
No, you're good. Like I said, sometimes you get caught up in your own world, right?
I will stop.
I don't want to go too far.
I will pump the brakes if it's bad.
Perfect. Okay. So like I said, straight out of a textbook. So you're calculating. You're the central planner. You need to lay track. You need iron. Unbeknownst to you, there has been a big explosion at an iron mine. Iron is now scarce. Just happened. We don't know why. Iron's scarce. So in a market setting, the price of iron is going to go up because there's less.
Demand, right, exactly.
Right, because there's less. And it's a little bit of a surge price. Okay. Iron is now unexpectedly scarce. We will, if we sell iron, we will raise the cost, not because we want more profit, but because by raising the cost, people buy it less, which means I don't run out of iron to sell. Okay?
Yep, makes sense.
So price of iron's gone up. We're in a market setting. If you work for the train company, you know, okay, iron just went up. I want to lay more track. Is there a potential alternative to iron that I could use? Is there another metal that might work? Is it this is the only one? This is the one supply, the one material that I need and I have no other options? Well, in that case, you're probably going to pay the price. But what that price going up does is it communicates to every single buyer of iron that iron is scarce. If you can, you should probably use something else.
Okay.
All because the price went up. No one knows that there was this big explosion. The price just increased randomly. So if you are using iron for, I don't know, like nails or something, well, maybe you'll use zinc for the next couple of months until that price goes back down, right? That's only because of that one bit, that one price increase. There's no other information communicated to every single firm. Iron's scarce. Adjust if you can. Now take price away. You're a central planner. You have less iron. How do you know who needs iron the most? All of these firms, right? Remember, when the price goes up, all of these firms, they make an internal calculation. They go, okay, can I substitute it for something else, or do I still need to use it? If I still need to use it, that means iron's my only option, right? I need the iron. Other people didn't.
Right.
Does this still make sense?
Following.
Okay, perfect. So if you take that price away, how do you as a planner know who needs it the most? You can't trust them to tell you. Everyone's going to tell you they need the iron. So how do you know? This is Mises' critique. He says price communicates a lot of information in a market setting that remove the price, you don't know how to allocate things.
So here's a clarifying
Go
thought
for it.
for people. So then in socialism, the pure form of socialism,
There's no prices.
there's no price. That's, I think,
Correct. Yes.
in a pure form of socialism, the utopian form, that is, I think, and
And remember, price is of a market setting, right? So if you are against markets, you want to move past it. There's no
so
bartering,
then is it
no
just
transaction.
like bartering trading? Like how do transactions happen in a socialist?
They don't.
So whatever you get,
Mhm.
and everyone gets the same.
Maybe. It's supposed to be, the phrase is, something of his need according to what he gets. Something along those lines.
Okay.
If you need it, you will have it. That is the promise.
And assuming you have the person or peoples in power that will make the right decisions for the masses to make sure everyone's taken care of.
Yes, and Mises' critique is that without price, you cannot make that. You don't know.
Understood. So,
and I want to add on, too, that this critique was so effective that all of the economists working on the other side of the socialist calculation debate accepted it as true and started to institute prices into their own theorizing of socialism, because there is legitimately no way around this issue. You can't have surveys because you can't trust the people that would send honesty back, right? There's no practical way for you to get the information that a price conveys. And again, this was so effective that it changes the entirety of what economists who were studying socialism started to theorize about. This was the thing.
I mean, I'd love to be in that room.
Right?
Oh, I'd love to be in that room. Like,
me too.
People on both sides of the aisle, the socialists are like, this is true. This is the only way to move forward. Actually, that's a very good point. Now that you brought that up, we might want to go back to the drawing board. I didn't actually mean what I said. I would love to see their faces when he brought up this point. They would
The best part is this was this is why I kind of love this little period so much. This has been a fascination for me during my program, but this is purely academic. They weren't talking. These were through papers. The people, the economists that were thinking that socialism was a great idea, that it was possible, they're publishing papers. Mises reads it all. He writes his own report, sends it back out, and they all read it and they go, "Whew, good point."
Yeah, he's not. he's not wrong.
But then they respond, right? Yeah. And they continue on.
Well, if anything, what this shows, and this is just a completely sidebar, the importance of just not living in an echo chamber.
Absolutely.
I think for what this does, it's funny. I just had breakfast with a guy who politically, socioeconomically, in every way, I think we differ. And I don't think there's actually one thing that we would actually agree on.
You're talking about our lunch earlier?
No, that wasn't that bad. No, I was kidding. And so, but I remember just being like, bro, I love these because I don't want to live in an echo chamber, because that's I think where you, end up believing things are true that actually aren't true in reality, right? So if like someone lives and all of their friends believe in socialism, and then they hear this podcast, they might be like, well, Wes actually just made some very good points. And that's the whole point. So I think props to those guys for having the humility to read Mises, right, paper and say, he has an excellent point.
To this day, you will find economists that think socialism is possible. You will not find a single economist that says you can do it without any sort of price mechanisms.
And so Karl Marx, was he...
That at the time.
Right, but he was kind of the main driver of socialism.
He created it, yeah.
So he never got to see his baby just get destroyed.
If you want to think about it that way, yeah. Yep.
So that's what I guess so the pure form of socialism is impossible. Now there's now a new form of socialism where they've since this debate of papers, Lange and Mises, right? Now it's like, okay, socialism now has price. So then what is now with pricing being involved,
right,
with socialism, what's now the difference between how does that really function now?
So it's still centrally planned. So what these I guess, for lack of a better phrase, they're pro-socialist economists at the time, what they end up starting to push is kind of a mixture of some market actions with a central planner. So you would have a planner that is taking in all sorts of information from all sorts of individual, people that need X, Y, and Z, and then I believe like bureaus that would be you're running the trains. Okay, they know what they need too. Okay. So they'd be reporting all these needs. All these different bureaus for different industry would be reporting all of these needs to the central planner, and then in this case, they would argue the central planner sets prices and allows the firms to then purchase at the price, the consumers to purchase at the price, whatever they need.
So then how would you keep from people with special interests influencing?
That's a different conversation. So this is another reason why I love this little academic debate that went on back in the day. One of the very first things that Mises and Hayek say, they say, okay, there are power dynamics here within this idea of socialism that seem so likely to corrupt the individual in charge that it's an untenable idea. And the response was, well, we're economists. We're not sociologists. We're not discussing whether power can corrupt people. We're discussing whether this market system could work. And so they have to then take a step back and say, okay, institutionally, what could be the issues? And the first thing they come up with is price.
Okay. What else did they come? Because my brain wants to run towards everything else. Like my brain wants to run towards, if this is the case, then why are politicians, pushing socialism if it just can't work? And so that's where I want, like my brain wants to go. But in this debate, was there any other thing? So if prices is number one, socialism can't work because there needs to be price, and price conveys information in a market. Is that a good way to summarize it?
I would, yeah. I would summarize it that way.
Told you I have a IQ of 10.
You passed. Good stuff.
And then what else? What else was in that debate kind of like crumbled Karl Marx's baby?
Okay. So are you familiar with F.A. Hayek?
No.
No? Okay. So he was a very well-known economist. He really kind of became, I guess, to his public notoriety in the 40s.
Yeah.
He writes the Road to Serfdom, which I'm sure some of your listeners probably know what that is. It was a very, very popular book, had a whole book tour at the time. I think that might have been in the 50s. But that was a big scathing book of why the Soviet Union isn't working well. Regardless, he brings up something known as the knowledge problem. So within a market, you have different types of knowledge, all right, that is actionable. Some of it's delivered by price, some of it is not. And I want to make sure I say this correctly. Yes. So knowledge can be decentralized, all right? So that's from many, many different areas and that you're ingesting all of this information. It can be, it's dispersed, right? So this is the price mechanism. Price disperses knowledge, okay? And it's also tacit a little bit, which is implied, right? all of these can potentially be measured, but a lot of them can't. So when you're talking about calculation, you need to know, like I said earlier, you need to know how much of what material to spread out. You need to know how much of what good to disperse to these, individuals. You need to know everybody's needs. There are some things within this system that kind of by happenstance come about when we're talking about just a market. There's a lot of luck involved, a lot of trial and error, that if you step back and try to actively plan it, you're not going to be able to successfully do so. Now, this is the portion of the, this is where the debate's left open. Publicly, the pro-socialist side actually wins this, because the final argument here is Hayek's knowledge problem. And it's effectively that there are things that happen within a market setting that you can't measure. We're social scientists, we're not physicists. So I can't tell you, for example, what the inflation rate will be at this time next year. I can't. I don't know. No one knows. It's not just my lack of skill as an economist. No one could do it. And if anyone is saying that they can, they're trying to sell you something. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. They're wrong. So this is kind of the where it ends. You've got people who would support this knowledge problem idea, this fact that there are things you could not have foreseen, can't control for. There's information dispersed that, just you don't have access to if you're the central planner. And there are those that disagree.
But in order for socialism to function correctly, right? And I know that you're saying that when it comes to, like, I guess what I'm not quite connecting the dots with that argument is if we don't know what's going to happen. That's fine, but like that's a problem for both capitalism and socialism, right?
Not quite. So let's look at what economists kind of do, at least what people think we do. Okay. We calculate equilibrium, right? So where the price level should be in a supply and demand context in an individual market. The information that it takes for me to do that is produced by the market. Okay. So in order for me to look at an industry and say, all right, here is, roughly where the price and demand level ought to be at least insofar as I could give you an estimate on that. Okay. I need information and knowledge that is produced by the interworkings of this market, of this industry. So if you take a step back, this is all retrospective. None of this is predictive. So Hayek's verbiage is it's information ex post required ex ante. So what this means is I need information in order to accurately plan all of this stuff. Right. I would need information generated after the fact before it ever starts. That's just a logical impossibility.
Yeah, right.
So effectively, that's the argument. It's this idea that you need ex post knowledge, ex ante.
Which you can't get.
It's a very common logical fallacy too.
And what's an example of that? Like where people
just it's a debate term.
Oh really?
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. So then when you pivot that to talk about capitalism, so if socialism in Karl Marx's purest form can't function because there's no price, information issues and everything else, which I know you talk about, that's also potentially a con for capitalism. What is in your mind, is capitalism where it's a free market? Is that the best economic process? Is it or theory, or I don't know how else to say that. And then I guess what would be the cons of capitalism? What are the pros of capitalism? We just kind of talked about the issues in that debate, but if we jumped over to capitalism, which I think we kind of talked about socialism, briefly, what would you say about capitalism? Kind of like we just talked about socialism. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first I want to make clear with the progression there with socialism too, because I think it's important to remember that you have Marx's version of socialism, which is effectively crippled by price theory, and then you have the adjustment after the fact, which involves bringing in the price mechanism.
And that would be what's
social.
popular today.
Yes, but that would be where the knowledge problem really exists.
Okay.
Because yes, it exists in Marx's original, setup for lack of a better word. But Hayek is primarily responding to the adjustment there after the fact. Because now, if you include price, why could it still not work? So that's the question.
Because you still don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, I just want to make sure that was clear for all the listeners.
Yeah.
Now, for capitalism, yes, I would say it's the best solution. Now, all the negatives to it, I would define as short run. So, could it lead to like really large firms and monopolies? Yes. Is that position incredibly unstable in the long run? Yes, absolutely.
So with monopolies, let's pause here.
Sure.
People believe that we need more regulation to stop the monopolies.
Right.
In theory, does it make economic sense to actually say if we actually had less regulation, monopolies would not last as long? I guess my question, is regulation actually helping monopolies stay in power longer?
So we got some layers. All right.
Was that a good question?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the question. I just want to. There are layers to it. So your first layer, are there regulations that help monopolies stay in power, or at least large firms? Because we don't, outside of like, electrical monopolies, right? Yeah. Which are of course
DTE
government and stated, right?
Yeah.
Outside of those types of examples, there aren't true monopolies right now. There are firms with very large market shares. Define the market however you want. We can get funny with the numbers, but there are very large firms. So are there large firms that are using, regulations and pushing for more regulations such that they can stay in power longer? Yes, absolutely. Is it a good idea to regulate monopolies so that they don't, pop up more, or even large firms? I say no, and it would lean on this idea of markets being more of a process than a like steady state of being. There's admittedly some back and forth on this within the different schools of thought in economics, but my position would be to look at, I like to use the example of like the kid game King of the Hill, right? King of the Hill. You're fighting with your friends to get up on the top of the hill. Well, imagine you're playing that on a big stack of gravel. Okay, that's the market. That's your market process. Everyone's fighting to get to the top. The moment you get to the top, not only is everyone else trying to knock you down, your footing's unstable too, right? So if you look at like Google right now, who 10 years ago would have thought that ChatGPT would be a major competitor to Google in 2024?
Right.
Well, they are, and it's hurting Google's market share. It's hurting their firm. But, we wanted to regulate them back then too, right?
Right.
So the point is, once you reach the top, not only are you fighting everyone that's below, there's also like this other pile of gravel where someone could just jump up and body slam you off the top anyway, right? Like it's so unpredictable.
If there was zero regulation for testing, creativity, people, like there's always going to be someone with a new idea, better idea to potentially topple the person that's currently in charge or the company. There's always going to be new innovation. Now, it might not happen 20 years. It might take 20 years for that cycle to take place. I mean, you look at like even like the rock, like people that were huge, like the Rockefeller family, for example. Like, like there were times where you had massively successful companies that just aren't anymore. And at that time, people were probably like, this company's never going anywhere. But
it did.
It did. So then,
now to be clear, those did have massive antitrust action against them. To knock them down and split them up. I do want to make sure that that's clear too.
I wonder what would have happened if that didn't take place.
Right.
That'd be interesting.
And that would be kind of what I am arguing. If you take away the ability for companies to help solidify their position through regulation, that's the prerequisite to that. which is an issue right now too. So I don't think there's an easy answer here.
Do you think that at its core, it's all about control? Like the reason, so if we strapped up the average politician that's pushing socialism, right, to a lie detector test.
Okay.
And I said, and we asked him the question, do you believe socialism is the best form? I'd be curious at A, what their answer would be. B, I wonder if you can't control a free market, because that's by definition, It's a free market, right? Government likes control. They like controlling things. So if you like controlling things, what is the best form of economic theory that you would want to have? It'd be socialism. Because then if government and the theory of socialism is the main guy that sets the prices, that sets all the stuff, as a government official, you'd be like, wait a second, so either I could be powerless or powerful. What school of thought would I like to attain to? Do you wonder if that's the reason so many people even subconsciously adhere to socialism because as a theory that they want to push because it just gives more power to the government?
So I thought you were taking this in a slightly different direction, and that's where I'm going to go with it. So
that's fine. I juked you out.
We'll just run with it. To me, I think there's something maybe a little deeper going on, even with people, voters, right? Not just politicians. I think this kind of applies to everybody. I've started to split people politically, in my own headcanon, based on how comfortable you are with the unknown versus how instinctually you want to control it and get an outcome. Because, with a lot of these issues, especially when we're talking about, firms, right? We're directly dealing with the market. This is true with international trade too. If you look at the problem and deep down, we know that we can't practically control the outcome. Best we can hope for is to influence it. How comfortable are you letting it be, letting it play out, and understanding, we might win, we might lose. I'm going to let it go, knowing that that's probably best in the long run? Or does that feeling of unease kind of creep in, and I know we can't control it, but gosh, we need to try. You know what I mean? So that's been more my perspective recently on how I've looked. Because I don't know. I mean, you can make an argument that maybe there's a lot of sinister action going on. I find it easier to take that out and wonder why, if everyone is being more or less truthful. As truthful as you can be in politics.
That's a big if, though.
Yeah, I know.
That's a big if.
At the end of the day, people do think there's a lot at stake. So understanding that and weighing that against how powerful that instinct of, gosh, we just, we need this type of outcome. I wonder how much that ends up influencing decision making.
I mean, that's best case scenario if that's what they want. Is like they're just trying to want what's best for humanity, and this is the only way they think it's going to happen if they control it, right?
Practically, it could lead to the very same situation you had outlined. And obviously, politicians themselves can get seduced by power, right? There's plenty of history on that. But, in terms of like people that, look at like the green regulations, right? We're trying to really push electric cars. We're really trying to cut emissions. And on one hand, would it probably be great if we could like cut short this big problem that's up on our doorstep? Yeah, absolutely. But then at the same time, like, how do you know what you're pushing is going to fix it?
Right.
And if you let it go, how do you know there wouldn't have been a fix that developed anyway?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, especially with the electrical, but like the government's just decided electric is the way. That is the only.
And it very well could be the future, right?
I mean, dude,
it could be the future
run
of
by
cars.
coal. Like, I don't see how it's much better, but
well,
whatever.
I mean, outside of that, right? Practically, electric vehicles, it could be the future of cars. It could. I don't know that.
But in a capitalistic society, there
maybe
would be
something
freedom
else develops
to have other things to develop. But if you put every incentive program, every tax break,
and now there's less innovation on other options.
Correct. And so with that being said, because that is what is currently happening.
Correct. Everyone's releasing an EV.
If you had to say America 2024, are we more socialistic or capitalistic? If like on a scale, like 50-50, are we still leaning? Do we still have more capitalism in our genes than we do socialism in America today? Or do we actually potentially have more socialism and less capitalism, like a 50-50 scale? Like what would be the ratio of like, if you had to put it into a percentage?
So when you first brought up this topic, you asked if there was like a third option.
Yeah.
There kind of is. It's called the mixed market economy. It's a honest to goodness attempt to go 50-50 between both options. So very common things that would fall under this are public zoos, because the zoo is a public-private partnership. It's in large part funded by the local government, but you have an individual firm that is running, operating it, and doing all the marketing and stuff for it, right?
Yeah, right.
You could look at like a school board that is public soliciting bids to renovate their school, public-private partnership, right? So when you get these intermixings between the public side being the government and the private being individual firms, you get this kind of cocktail of a mixed market economy, right? And I would say that a lot of our systems right now are produced with that in mind. So you see quite a bit of subsidies to industries to try and pop up. This was obviously big back when the housing crisis happened, right? Financial
Like
bailouts.
2008?
Financial bailouts to banks. Banks are firms, they're institutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they basically received a massive subsidy from the government. That's a mix. That's once these things start getting mixed in together, that's when you get to this third thing called the mixed market economy. And I would say that's where we are.
Can that function healthily without a bad result in the future?
I don't think so.
I guess without like one or the other coming out at the end, if that makes sense what I'm saying. Like socialism or capitalism. Like, is there a world where this can function and everything kind of be okay? Or is it always going to yield towards one or the other will win at the end? So either socialism will win at the end of this mixed bag or capitalism will win at the end. Both can't can both coexist in any type of like healthy economic manner?
It's a good question. I don't think I have a good answer for you. Obviously, Marx himself and quite a few other socialists would argue there's a progression, right? You've got capitalism, you've got late stage capitalism, you've got this middle ground, and then you got socialism that pops out at the end. Joseph Schumpeter, actually an economist that I generally like quite a bit, but he writes in the book Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy that as consumers continue to be more and more separated from the actual market process, right? So the actual production of some goods, the actual act of going to a place to purchase things, things of that nature. As you get more and more separated, you are more prone to being sympathetic to socialism, and then in that way, it is inevitable.
It's a slippery slope argument at some point. Like
that's what those are saying. I don't know if I'd make it, but
open the water tab of socialism over time, it could just like the safest play for people who believe in capitalism is to allow no socialism.
Maybe.
In theory.
Like I said, I don't myself have a very good answer for this one. I would just say that there are people on both sides of this argument that have made that exact argument that you just said. There are those that think that the mixed market economy is a fantastic idea, and it would just go on in perpetuity and be great.
That's like a utopian world, though. Right? Like
it's functioning okay right now.
Is it?
Yeah. All our metrics are down.
Down? Is that a good thing?
Yeah, inflation rate is down. Unemployment rate is down. I think there are some pretty big long-term concerns, but, things are clicking at the moment.
At the moment?
Yeah.
So it works. As long as right now we're happy, it works.
Hey, welcome to politics.
So this is a good segue. I think so I guess I like trying to summarize on the podcast because like I've always.
Go for it, by all means.
Like if just side note, but someone said like the key of a good host is a host should be able to ask the exact question I as a listener was thinking and then be able to summarize it in a way that I can understand in case I
missed
missed
it or
something,
Yeah.
right? So socialism can't work.
Correct.
Pure form of socialism can't work because the pure form of socialism does not allow for price. Since the debate in the early 1900s with Hayek and Mises, they have created an updated form of socialism with
within
price.
the debate, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
With price now. Price and socialism can now be happy together with their new kind of, baby, offspring of socialist ideas. And so right now the question is, do we trust a free market more than we trust an actual entity to set things? That's kind of at the core. That's kind of the debate between capitalism and socialism. Is your risk tolerance okay trusting a free market, or do you prefer having someone control?
In terms of whether ordinary people support one or the other,
Yes.
I would say that is what's going on. In terms of, does this mixture of the price mechanism into a socialist setting, is that tenable? No, because of the knowledge problem. These are both separate from a mixed market economy, which is effectively a public-private partnership.
Gotcha.
Which is more of what we're seeing today.
Would like Obamacare be an example of that?
Obamacare was more or less single payer. I would lean more.
But that's a socialistic ideal, though, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's where I was heading with that. Yeah.
Okay. So it's not even a mixed bag. That's just like pure socialism.
If it is something that is solely government provided, you can make a pretty quick leap to saying it's potentially socialist.
Okay.
Socialistic.
So you mentioned something briefly because you mentioned inflation and jobs, right? As far as like currently being happy and numbers looking good. Yeah. I know that recently we just hit, I think, a record for the S&P 500. So in theory, the economy could look good on paper, right?
It is, yeah.
Well, I mean, it looks good on paper, I guess is what it says. I don't think the American family. I don't think America feels that. I don't think the average family feels that. That was at a debate that I had with someone else. Like I know the average, at least I work with tons of employees every year. Every single employee I talk to right now is saying times are hard, things are tight.
Yeah.
95% of people, things are hard. I have 170 business owners that I personally currently work with. I am adding more to the fold every single month, and almost every single business owner says things are tight, budget's tight, high cost. It's like a rough time to run a business. So how can, when you talk to the person in America, they're saying things are tight, it sucks. But then you look at the numbers and you hear a politician, like you hear Biden's White House secretary, Pierre or whatever her name is, Pierre or whatever, be like, our economy has never been stronger. And then you have the stats to prove it, theoretically. I'm not saying, I know the stats exist, but I'm just saying. But why does the average American not feel it? Like, why does the average American have more debt than they've ever had before? Inflation rates being insanely high to where their paycheck doesn't matter as much as it used to. Cost of home is being high. Like, how then, if our economy is doing so well, why does nobody feel it?
So, fantastic question. It would be a disservice if I did not at first bring up that there is a little bit of politicization going on here, at least as far as surveys go. If you are a Republican and a Republican is in the office of the presidency, you are far more likely to be happy with the way things are going. Vice versa is true as well. I don't think that's the full story. It would just be a disservice if I didn't bring it up.
No, I understand. But in my question, this is just purely insurance conversations I'm having with. Yeah. And by the way, Detroit is significantly more left-leaning.
Yes, it is.
Significantly. So I'm probably talking like 70-30 Democrats to Republicans. And then even the Democrats are saying it's tight. Because politics on their brain, I'm not saying like, do you think Joe Biden's doing a great job? They would probably say things are tight, and I love Joe Biden. But my point is like, so I understand your point, but like in this, when I've talked to actual people outside of politics, just asking them like, hey, how are things right now? They're all like, I'm cutting everything I can. Things are tight. I don't have savings.
My only point is to get into what I'm about to get into without at least bringing up that there is a little bit of a there is a little bit of partisanship involved.
Sure, I don't.
Would be
I'm
a
sure.
disservice.
That's
So
fair.
that was all.
Fair,
What
fair.
I would say to practically answer your question is the inflation rate. The inflation rate is down right now. Okay, it's a rate. It's not a set number. So when you see the inflation is at 3 point whatever percent, that doesn't mean that since it was at 7 and we're down to 3, that we've actually decreased inflation by 4%. That means that inflation is still growing at 3 point whatever percent. So practically, what this means is, yes, everything is a lot more expensive than it was because you start at 2020, right before all the COVID shutdowns and all of this. You had a massive increase in printing from the Federal Reserve, which increases inflation. There's a little bit of a delay. Starts to peak there in late 21, early 22. Gets up to 7, 8, right? Really, really high.
Yeah.
And then now it's kind of trickled back down to 3 as they've stopped and halted their printing cycles there at the Federal Reserve, but it's still positive. So your inflation rate is calculated off of a consumer price index, which is, we pick a basket of goods that we think most people are purchasing and is representative of the time. It shifts with whatever. Point is, that basket of goods is still a lot more expensive today than it was at this time last year and is still even more expensive the year prior. It's a time series thing, and it's a rate. So the fact that it's positive means that prices are still high.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So then,
and it's not going to go down.
right. That's my question. So inflation goes up. So the in definition of inflation is where maybe I might butcher this definition. Basically, the higher the inflation, the less of our dollar's worth, right?
More or less, yeah.
Okay. So high inflation bad, unless there's reasons for the high inflation.
No, high inflation bad.
Okay, cool. So let's just say 7% inflation. Everything costs more now. Groceries cost more. Gas costs more. Every just to live in America now, you are 7% poorer than you were the previous year, if or whatever, or whatever the difference was. If it was 3 to 7, you're now 4% poor or whatever, just by existing. When inflation rates go down, do companies, when they price goods, do they take an account for that and move their prices back down to match inflation? Or because inflation was high, everyone got used to paying a certain things for goods, it stays there and their profit margin continues to increase. So like if everything gets really expensive, we'll get used to paying that. Do companies come down with price when it comes to inflation? Does that make sense? Or do they just normally keep it there?
So there are a couple of things that I want to talk about here. The quickest one is to again, it's a rate. So the fact that the rate is positive, when it was 7, that means, if it was 7 last month and it's 3 this month, it means that last month we're only 3% more inflation. Right. So prices are still on an aggregate, right? This isn't, some things are going to be up, some things are going to be down. On the average, things are still more expensive and your dollar as opposed to the total is less valuable. It's constantly going up. So even though inflation rate went down, that doesn't necessarily mean that things are inherently cheaper or that your dollar's more valuable. It's still less valuable than when you last looked.
And so the only
just by the 3%.
So the only way to beat this from is to either get
you need it negative for prices to go down,
or for our overall income to increase by X percentage, right? To match inflation.
Not quite. So inflation is almost entirely a monetary phenomenon. So what I mean by that is it is almost entirely derived by how much money is in circulation. If there's a lot of money in circulation, your single dollar is worth less than if there's not a lot. That's not literally how the calculation is done, but conceptually that's what's going on. So when the Federal Reserve started printing more cash to give, help fund the stimulus packages during the COVID lockdowns, they printed more, which then later on.
But they knew that this was going to happen.
Yes, they did it willingly. Yeah.
So why, but they just didn't care. Why didn't they care? Or not that they didn't care. Why did they?
So there's an argument that you can kind of pour oil or gas on a fire, right? Like if things are down, if you inject a lot of cash, you'll increase consumption.
The whole definition of the word stimulus, right?
Basically. Now that's debatable. There are people on both sides of that within economics, right? And within this field, that is not a set in stone reality. When you're in a recession, there are those that would say spend, but there are quite a few economists that would say don't spend at all. You need to kind of let it progress through.
Let it happen.
So yes,
that's where you get into politics, where it's like, well, we don't want a recession to happen on our watch.
Kick the can.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, because you were talking about prices. People, firms rather, charge more when inflation is up than when inflation is down. But to really dive into, I guess, talking about that, I think we need to discuss what price is. And price is not a product of input costs. So at least economically, when we're looking at a firm does not go down its balance sheet and go, okay, I'm spending this much on labor, I'm spending this much for the property that we're in, I'm spending this much on the machines, and because of all these inputs, here's a level of profit percentage above that I want, and that's the price I'm going to charge. That's not how it works. Practically, what price is it is an expression of value from the consumer, right? So if you're a firm and you're trying to set a price, if you've never brought this product to a market before, what you're doing is trying to anticipate the level at which consumers who would buy your product would value it at.
So what the demand is.
More or less, right? So price is subjective.
Yep.
It is not a product of input costs. Price is purely a function of what people will buy it at and what they value it at. So when you say, inflation went up, our prices went up, part of that is driven by the increased costs and the decrease in value of the dollar, okay? Part of it is. The other part is that there are a lot of people that want that product, that are willing to pay at that level, and that value it at that level. So
it keeps it at that level. They raise it because they know they can get people still to buy.
Right. So you have two kind of conflicting portions of this, right? If you're the firm, you need to have a price above your level of costs in order for you to produce the product at all. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth it. But if the consumer does not value your good above that level of input costs,
you adjust accordingly, right?
Well, you're not going to sell it. It's
unless
not worth
unless you lower the price, right? Then you could.
Well, why would you? Because you take a loss.
Right.
So here's where it kind of comes through, at least to me. What makes something valuable is almost entirely a function of what people value it at, not necessarily
the profit margin. Has anyone ever done a study on the effect of credit cards and cost of goods? So do you think that, and the reason I ask that is,
question.
I think everyone, where I'm going with this, but if everyone had a debit card, credit cards did not exist. So you either had a debit card or cash, and you saw something, when you looked at your bank account, well, you can't afford it, so you don't buy it.
Yep.
Well, now people can buy significantly more than their means. So then that muddies the pool of what people can actually afford, if that makes sense. Because now people are saying, yeah, I can buy that, even though they don't actually have the real cash to be buying that thing.
Yeah.
And so then companies still keep things at the same price, or because people are buying it, but then there actually is no money to actually support their purchase because it's all now in debt.
Well, they still get the money.
They get the money, but now the consumer's at a loss because now they have debt and they're paying interest on it. I don't know. I wonder how that would affect our economy if credit cards just went away. If it would cripple us for a time being because the buying power of the average American would go down significantly. But
I suspect that would be the case.
Over time, it would be better for us.
Maybe.
That's my question. That was my question. Like, over time, has credit cards hurt the U.S. economy more than they've helped it?
Keep hitting it.
Everyone listening, I'm sorry. I just keep smacking the side of my microphone.
Anyway, I would say there's a little bit of a moral judgment here. Not like a not in the bad way, right?
Yeah,
It sounds like you want to help people not be in debt, and
Right.
and I get it, it's a good cause, but practically, what then is the policy solution to that sort of idea, right? If credit cards are bad, do we need to take it away because some people misuse it?
No, absolutely not. I think it was more of a theoretical question. Like
Yeah.
in theory, has credit cards, if we imagine the US economy without credit cards, if credit cards just never were existed, I wonder where the average American would be financially versus where they're at now. If it's actually helped the average American be able to create more businesses with credit, take loan, or if I'm just curious if that study's ever been done on the effect of credit cards.
I've
on the
not
US
seen it.
economy.
I've not seen it. It may exist. I would implore you to go look for it, and if you find it, definitely send it to me. I'm open to the idea. It definitely could.
I don't know, it's just
I'm
interesting-
agnostic. I have no idea.
Yeah. So to wrap up, I mean, we've actually already talked for like an hour and a half, which is insane. Yeah, it's great. I want to talk about one more thing. So this is going to get a little political. I'm going to try not to make it political, but it is what is happening. And I guess I don't know the effect that it could have on the economy. So
Okay.
I want to talk about immigration and economics.
All right.
So throughout, obviously, we know there's a big immigration. You can view it as a problem. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I'm going to call it a problem because that's how I view it as a problem.
Go for it.
You have a bunch of people that are currently not U.S. citizens, that are not taxpayers, coming into the country. I think we had like 1.3 million last year in just 2023 come in the country illegally. That's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of people working jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of people not paying taxes. That's just facts. Now, whether that's good or bad, we can argue that on a different podcast. But the fact is, there's a lot of people that aren't paying taxes that are working jobs. Now, potentially working jobs that Americans wouldn't work anyway. That's, again, beside the point. But the point is, that's a lot of people coming in and, I guess, disrupting what would be a normal taxpayer job.
Yes.
How does that affect the economy? And why? I'll leave it there. How does it affect the economy? Does it affect the economy? And has it helped? Like, is that something that an economist would be like, that's a problem? I guess is my question.
All right, I'm going to try and it's a thought experiment that we're going to do, and it's going to be relevant at the end. All right. So
I'm ready.
Let's say
Let's jump in, baby.
All right. Let's say there's a firm opens up a factory in a different country.
Okay.
Right. We're not analyzing this from an American perspective. We're analyzing this from the country that it opened up the factory in.
Yep.
There are going to be new jobs that this firm's going to, create, for lack of a better word, even though I don't like the terminology there. But there are going to be people that are going to be working these jobs. There are going to be a lot of people left behind. Is this a net positive for that little country?
Probably.
Yeah. So there are people that are going to argue that it's not. They're going to say that, well, if you just stayed out of the way, everyone would have been better off because we left some people behind when we created these slightly higher paying jobs, right?
Okay.
So that's going to be an argument. So now we'll go ahead and we'll look at immigration in the United States. You have a lot of people that are coming in and working cheap jobs, more or less, that otherwise are likely unfilled or are robotic labor of some sort. Okay, so practically this is a trade. We're trading the money that we're paying them for them to be able to be here, have access to things that we have, and hopefully they live a better life. I don't know if that's 100%, but that's at least the pitch that people tend to make. This is a net positive in the same way as that firm going to that other country is a net positive for that country, because it opens up a lot of other opportunity as well, not strictly in those places that, in those industries, but on the side. There are more people now that are not working those jobs. They're free to do other things now. There are other opportunities that now, not having this specific job filled by this, by American workers who are forced to be charged more, right? There are other opportunities that get opened up on the sides, even within the same company. So it's a trade. Trade's good. Trade's mutually beneficial. So
to
most economists are going to say
to continue
it's
the thought
good.
experiment,
It's good.
it's good. So is it good to have immigrants, or is it good to have illegal immigrants? That's because to me that's a big difference. To me, America has always been doing the trade of like we've had people come in here legally, working jobs that maybe potentially the average American didn't want to work, wouldn't work, whatever. Good trade, right?
Right.
So is the trade immigrants, or is the trade we are actually willing to bend the law to allow people in here illegally so that XYZ can happen? Or are there more ramifications of them being illegal that actually could hurt the United States?
You want to talk about the economy.
Right. So because I can have someone else that's not an economist on, we can talk about the politics of like the safety of Americans. Sure. And like that could be we could talk about that now if you want to, but I think from a pure economic standpoint, so if America, I guess they put in, if America looks at, 1.3 million people that are currently non-taxpayer citizens entered the United States last year under the Biden administration. Fact. Right. Cool. What does that do to my money? If that's where we said, like, what does that do to the economy of the United States? Like,
helps.
That's the question.
So if we're purely going to talk about the economics of this, all right, the question that I would pose to you is practically what is different between someone that went through all of the proper channels to show up versus someone that just migrated over the border to do a farming job.
They pay taxes.
Functionally, what's the difference?
They pay taxes.
Yeah. What do taxes fund?
Things that hopefully would be less tax increases because there's more people paying into them.
Sure.
In theory. So that would be the only answer I would have would be taxes. If you had 1.3 million, if tomorrow we could say, hey, we're gonna have 1.3 million people start paying taxes, that's a significant boost.
Now a lot of them wouldn't be tax eligible, right?
Because they don't make enough.
Right.
No. Okay, we have 400,000.
Not as big of a boost as you want.
Okay, that would be that was the main thing. So from an economic standpoint, taxes
and the benefit's going to outweigh the cost, right? If you really look
at
the production increase of this extraordinarily cheap labor that you are otherwise not able to access, different story if we're less restrictive on going overseas and across the borders ourselves with manufacturing opportunities to do this, right?
Yeah, because from a pure economic
it should be able to go both ways.
Yeah,
is what we're saying. Yeah,
and also even just from a cost of labor, cost of goods, you are now able to pay people under what would be legally allowed if they were a legal citizen, right? Hypothetically speaking, because technically you can pay them whatever you want. There's no minimum wage,
correct,
to an illegal immigrant. So then you could be getting significantly more value, hypothetically speaking, because of the regulations that are put in.
Now understand too that this is not only good for the firm, right? The cheaper labor, definitely a plus for the firm, but also look at the individual, right? The worker. So, a lot of times, this, by the way, makes me so popular at parties. Look, sweatshops in China, okay? Child labor.
Yep.
Those kids are in families that do not earn a lot of money at all.
Correct.
The family needs cash.
Yep.
Is that kid in a terrible situation? Yes. Is it probably a good thing that they're able to work and earn money and help their family, and hopefully all of them don't starve? Absolutely.
Yep. It's funny, side note. And by the way, for the people listening, this is a thought exercise of economics only.
Yeah.
Like, I am not at all, if you know me at all, for illegal immigration whatsoever. I think you're breaking the law, and we can have that conversation at a different point. But from an economic theory, sometimes it's good to strip back. Like, if we're talking pure numbers, that's the goal of this whole podcast is what...
I appreciate it.
So, like, what does the economics teach of... And, like, that's a very interesting thought was, I think a lot of people would be like, oh, the illegal immigration is killing our economy. Well, actually, that might not be the case. Because that's a cool conversation to have.
It's good for the people that are working the jobs. It's good for the firms that are hiring that jobs out for lower cost labor. And it's good for the people generally over time. It's not going to be good immediately to the people that have lost the opportunity to have those jobs. Yeah. But over time, because of increased production, because of new innovation, they're going to have opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had. Yeah. It's an entire net positive. Yeah. Now, take the legal stuff as you will. Correct. I'm not speaking to that at all.
Which that is a very interesting thing. And And again, I am not saying that because it's a net positive, therefore we should just let it keep happening. That is not what I'm saying, just to clarify there. But from a thought exercise perspective, I mean, that's a very interesting fact that it's not killing us from an economy perspective.
More people would understand that anytime a trade happens, it is inherently mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
Because if you make an argument that it wasn't, that one side got robbed, you're making a judgment on information that you don't have.
Yeah.
So the fact that something transpired indicates that, at least to the parties that negotiated it, they believe it to be mutually beneficial. If you start to analyze and operate a lot of things in that way, everything from buying a car to the U.S. trade deficit nationally, right? It paints a very, very different picture at that point than what I perceive, at least, to be the traditional quote-unquote narrative.
Interesting. Yeah, and I guess, that's a fascinating thing to think through. The one thing I was going to say, you mentioned sweatshops and not being popular at parties.
Because I would not advocate for the minimum wage either, which also makes me just so popular.
Yeah, no, me either. I mean, I think that's anti-capitalism. I mean, that's what it is. It's more regulation. But so in college, we had it was our capstone class. Okay.
All right.
We had this software that was so basically every person had to create a shoe company, and there was this software that we had. It was like you were like in groups of 3 or 4. And you could choose anything you wanted. You could choose outsourcing. You could choose the price of the shoe, the quality of the shoe, and it was like everyone was in the same market, so it kind of created its own like market conditions for everybody.
Cool. Yeah, that's fun.
And so it was a really cool thing. I think the team that won was actually the dumbest team because they just threw in whatever numbers and they got lucky. True story. But it was a really...
Well, if that doesn't tell you what the market process is, I don't know what will.
Yeah, a good lesson in economics, I guess. But we decided to outsource our shoes, so because it was significantly cheaper. And so our professor was like ethically, so then he started talking about the ethics of outsourcing. And this was in front of the whole class. And he's like, Dylan, your team decided to outsource. Have you considered that you bended your ethics to allow child labor? And I'm like, I didn't bend my ethics at all. And so we had a debate like in front of the whole class on why I think in that scenario it's a good thing for that happen. And what we actually did is we actually created this huge thing where because it was our company, we could do whatever we want. So we actually created like schooling for the kids.
Oh, sure.
So nice. We actually and what we did in our company was the average kid only worked 5 hours a day of the actual production. And that was still significantly more savings than what we would get to pay an American to do that. And then the other 3 hours, they actually were in school, taught by a teacher. And we actually did the actual math of for whatever it would have cost for a line worker here in the United States. This is assuming we didn't have robotics. This was back with we didn't have it was people versus salary here versus salary there.
Right.
It was still cheaper for us to employ children to work for 5 hours a week with schooling, with safe environments, with all this stuff than it would be to employ one American. And it was just actually an interesting thing. So the teacher couldn't get over the fact that we were still employing children, but the point was it was still better for the company and better for the child, because we were trying to say look, they're going to be way better working with us in a safe, healthy environment than they would be, because they're going to be working either way. That's, I think, the one thing.
That's the other part of it too.
The people when they get mad is they will be working somewhere. So if you say all of the companies that actually have ethics and the companies that actually create good working environments, if you force them to pull out, they are going to work somewhere. And they actually might now be working in a significantly less good environment than they would have been had you been allowed to stay there.
Well, I'll put it this way, that like I said earlier, the family needs the money. Okay. Right. So, we are in a very fortunate position over on this side of the Atlantic Ocean.
The pond.
Yeah, over this side of the pond. To sit back and say, well, kids shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
And for the most part, while this isn't 100% true, but for the most part, kids here don't have to.
Yeah. And that's lovely.
Overseas, that's not always the case, right? If the family, you got a family that has 3 or 4 kids, they're in extreme poverty, and everybody needs to work just to put dinner on the table. If you get rid of child labor, you are absolutely
Family.
those families, those people, those kids.
It's just funny.
And it sucks because you can't
it's
win.
Well, it's just a reality. I mean, I think that if we wanted
And
to
it's
have
a terrible reality.
if we want to have a utopian debate, then I think we would all agree. Yeah, like it'd be great for a kid to be able to go to school.
Yeah,
it'd be
it's not
great.
easy.
Yeah, but that's not the reality. And on a side note, to punish companies, forcing them to, when we talk about American jobs, and that's completely different. But like, if you're like, you can't have child labor in other countries, well, it's like those kids will be working somewhere because they have to. That's the reality. We can't change that. I'd love to change that. So, well, sometimes I think in America it'd be good. It'd be good. Also, not very popular viewpoint, but what's the stat? I don't know if I don't have the actual stat, so don't crucify me in the comment section. But I think like America's like last to develop adults of like actual contributing citizens to like the whole. Like we're last in the age bracket. So like it's like 25 is the median or 24 is the median of actually like people creating actually any type of help for the mass. Sure. And like in other countries it'll be like 13, 14. And I don't know, I just think that adults, what is viewed as adult is very high in the United States compared to any other country, which I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but
I'm sure you can make arguments both ways.
Yeah. And we also have a bunch of adults that still act like babies. So I don't know. I don't know what that means.
Well, people are complicated.
We are complicated. Last thing I wanted to go over before we kind of wrap up this podcast, and I think this has been great. I could talk about this stuff forever.
Yeah, me too.
Like we could probably have like a 4-hour just conversation on economics and I think there's just something powerful to take emotion out of something for a little bit, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because it's very easy for me to say capitalism is better because I think it's better.
Right.
Because I emotionally believe it's better. I also believe in the depravity of man. And so I think that socialism, just by me believing that there's actually not like inherent good in every single person, that every person actually is bent is going to be bad. Socialism can't work in that situation. Just in my worldview, it can't happen.
Sure.
But that's my worldview. That's what I believe. But then if there's actually statistics and numbers and actually like theories to back it up, that actually is a good way to think through it as well. The one thing I want to talk about to end it was this question. In 2024, is there such thing as a free market in America? Because I don't know, you've probably heard the statistics. You have like BlackRock, Vanguard, and there's a third company that owns like 70% of the companies in the S&P 500. That's a big topic right now, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of people are now, we talked about Larry Fink at lunch. We talked about is there one man pulling the strings behind the scenes of the economy? Is there 3 companies that have an influence? Like, is there a free market? So when we invest money into the stock market, can the average American trust that a free market is still going on? Or is the reality something different, that there really is no such thing as a free market in America anymore?
Loaded question.
I'm good at those.
Yeah, that's great.
Too loaded? I'm sorry.
No, you're totally fine. It's a good question. It's a very smart one to ask. I would say 2 things. One, what we talked about earlier, right? Where just the presence of large firms does not necessarily mean that something has gone wrong in the free market, right? It is our king of the hill on a pile of gravel example. Just because a company got really big doesn't mean that there is not something unforeseen coming up. It doesn't mean that someone below them isn't going to overtake. The beauty of market processes is that it breeds innovation, especially over the course of time. So, you brought up Rockefellers and other really, really large, Standard Oil, all these companies in the past. Yes, there was antitrust action against them. At the same time, you look at iTunes. iTunes was supposed to ruin the music industry, and lo and behold, here comes Spotify, right? Knocks them off their perch. Now you got Apple Music. iTunes isn't even really a thing so much anymore. eBay was a threat at one point. I swear, there's always these large companies that pop up and people are afraid that they're not going to go anywhere. And if the market is allowed to progress and actually be this process of innovation and be this back and forth that takes place over a period of time, in the short run, sure, there might be a near monopoly. There might be an Amazon that runs the show for a bit. There might be a Google that's going to have over 90% of the search market, which they do right now.
Right.
But again, ChatGPT pops up. Who knows what might pop up to compete with Amazon's cloud service? Again, AI is a total wild card here. So I would say that first of all, it's a market process. A market's not just what we're sitting in right now. It grows, it changes, it's unanticipated, it's totally unpredictable.
Right.
And it is a process above anything else. So in terms of, can there even be a free market if you have 5 or 6 really large firms that own a lot of this, the S&P 500, which, by the way, is just a segment, right? It's not the entire system. It's not every firm. It's just a few very, very large ones. So could there practically be a free market in that instance? Yes, absolutely, because, again, it's a process. It's not stagnant. It's ever-changing, and it's unpredictable. Now, if you're asking currently, do these firms have a lot of influence because politicians listen to them and institute regulations that restrict competition from coming up and harm the process of innovation? Because, we're not going to have times to really discuss it too much, but monopolies are terrible innovators.
Yeah.
Practically they are. So if you have a lot of influence and if you can pay, lobbyists and you can pay to charities and exhibit that influence to get certain regulatory outcomes to maintain your position, is that a problem right now? Absolutely.
So we're
a big yes and a no.
Yeah, it's like a yes, but in theory it could work. I think we can go full circle here if we have, and keep in mind the S&P 500 is not the only place to invest. Obviously, like that's just one of the there's 1,000 other ways that you can invest your money. I understand. Yeah, but I do think that is a big concern. Even Patrick David Bett. I don't know if you know who that is, but he started an insurance company. He has probably the biggest. He's up with Rogan, not as quite as big of a podcast, but he has a huge podcast with a huge fan base. Conservative, I think, by nature. But that's one thing that he's been talking a lot about, and a lot of people are, freaking out about that. But I think it's funny because people that are freaking out about the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, are like, well, we have to do something. Well, it's like, you can't regulate them.
Put them there.
Right, because that's exactly what you're fighting against, And so it's an interesting problem.
I want to add this really quickly. This is straight out of Milton Friedman. Okay, so if anyone wants to back check and look it up and read some more about this sort of idea, what I'm about to say is Milton Friedman, economist that was very, very influential, especially in conservative circles. But he frequently would remind people that being pro-business is not the same as being pro-market, not the same as being pro-capitalism. Because capitalism and a free market is a profit and loss system, not just a profit system. So when you set up regulations such that you mitigate losses, such that things are too big to fail, bailouts, subsidies, things that get in the way of companies falling through the floor. When you start to lean into those things, you're no longer practicing free markets. You're no longer practicing capitalism. You've got a profit system. You're trying to make sure everyone makes profit. So I would here like to emphasize that if a market's going to operate, it's a profit and loss system. It's a trial. It's an error. It's unexpected. It goes on, and there are going to be winners, losers, and nothing's going to stay the same. So when you start to regulate things,
everybody can't be winners. I mean, and this is probably a bad analogy, but it's even sports, right? There has to be a loser. There has to be a winner. I mean, in the whole movement where everyone's a winner, that's just bullcrap. Like that doesn't. No, there are winners, there are losers in sports. And for a market to be functioning healthily, there needs to be losers just as many as there are winners.
Correct.
That's what you're saying.
If not more.
losers than winners.
Yeah, if you think about it, if the process of innovation is so fraught with potential for failure, right? So if you have a structure or a market context where there are, you're needing to pursue innovation in order to get a leg up, in order to overtake and win that, king of the hill game, right? There are going to be far more failures than there are successes because it's going to be so difficult to reinvent the wheel. But someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
You just need the one.
Yeah,
and it unseats everything.
You just need to let the flexibility for people to innovate and let that happen. And then over time, and it might take longer than you want, and the monopoly, so to speak, might be in power longer than you wish it would, but there is someone that's going to take their place if they're
as long as you don't get in the way.
Yeah, and the problem with America right now is we have a lot of people getting in the way, and you have a lot of bailout. I mean, that's just the fact, at least in my opinion right now.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the subsidies and bailouts. Yeah.
But I also don't know how it would be a massive change for America to ever go away from that.
It would, and we've been this way for a very long time.
Correct.
As well. This does predate the questions we're talking.
Yeah,
This
predates us, that's for sure. And
many of these can be traced back to FDR and John Maynard Keynes, actually. Keynesianism is an economic thought that we don't have time for, but if people want to look it up, by all means.
Let's have to do a part 2 of the podcast. Then we could talk about Alexander Hamilton, the banking system, and how that influenced government
banking.
Control. Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have not.
Oh, that's F.A. Hayek again.
Okay. Yeah. And we didn't also talk about crypto and the economy. That was one thing I was going to talk about. But speaking of crypto, we do have a podcast we just released on cryptocurrency. So if you're into that, you can check that out. Well, man, I appreciate that. I think, if anything, for the listeners, just living a life where you want to learn. If you don't know, ask dumb questions. We talk about that at lunch. Like, if you don't know, ask dumb questions. There are probably questions that I asked today that Wes was like, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," but that's okay.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, you can say that. I'll pay you later.
No.
But that's the beauty of having good conversation, is asking questions, and then like also putting yourself out there, being willing to be wrong, being willing to take a loss, and that's how good conversations happen. So as people listen to this podcast grows, that's what I want this podcast to be shaped on, is two people being willing to be wrong and actually have good conversation. I think we had that today. And so I appreciate you coming on the show. I did want to leave you with an opportunity to promote whatever you want to promote. I know you have a cool Substack. I don't know if you want to call it blog or whatever you want to call it. It is sweet. So I'll let you promote that real quick, and I'll do a little quick promotion for you as well. But go ahead. What do you got going on? What do you want people to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so as you mentioned at the very beginning here, Dylan, I do a lot within the Pistons content creation space. So, if you guys are Pistons fans local to Detroit, definitely tune into the Pistons Pulse by the Detroit Free Press. I'm a producer on that. And then I also host the Pin Down from Detroit Bad Boys with my co-host Blake Silverman. Both are great. We have a lot of fun, even though the team's really bad. So, that's a good time as well. If you'd like to follow more of my, my thoughts and, musings on current events, economic theory, I write a blog on Substack. It's called Davenport Economics. Trying to grow that, just trying to have a little bit more of an intellectual space as well. Keeping the two separate, of course. But I have a lot of fun. Would appreciate a subscribe. Obviously got the email list and all that, so it's a great time.
Yeah, if you subscribe, he sends out occasional newsletters. What I appreciate
Try to do weekly.
Yeah, what I appreciate about it, it's not too much. That's what I say. It's actually not too much. It's a good amount. 2 to 4 pieces of content a month. It's enough to just digest, but it's not enough that just annoys your inbox either.
Yeah,
so
I appreciate that.
I would definitely recommend everyone listening to the podcast subscribe to his blog on Substack, Davenport Economics. It's a cool things. I've read some things that I'm like, that's interesting, and other things I'm like, that is insane. I never thought of it that way. And so it's a good mix of everything. I want to
hear what was what.
And I love it. So I click it every time it comes through my email. I'd recommend you guys do the same. I will have a link in the description if you guys want to type in your email, go to your Substack, that they can do that way. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Dylan England Show. If you're still with us after 2 riveting hours of awesome conversation, thank you seriously. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks, man.
Thank you.